This is The Hollow, a dark fantasy adventure written by Dean Dunakin and narrated by Louis Krahn. Part 1, Chapter 4, Smith. He woke to the sound of children thumping about. Who knows where they were, but it was startling how 80 pounds of little boys could shake a building so. The sun was already up, so he rolled out of bed, chugged some water, washed in his basin, and dressed for the day. He wound his way through the hallways to the brightly decorated common room where a number of people were already eating. Cassie was busying dishes around, while Philo laughed uproariously at a joke of his own, no doubt. Noom smiled at the scene, then dampened that just slightly when he saw the trio of travelers at the table eating apple pie. Aiden and Dev were wearing street clothes. Omega looked much the same as last night. "Don't worry," Cassie called across the room. "We saved you a slice." He made his greeting and sat down to pour a coffee. The pitcher was empty. "Sorry, mate," said Aiden sheepishly. "It's been a while since we had the luxury of coffee." "This lot says you have business," began Philo. "Pity I was going to offer you some hours at the forge, but one man's loss is another's gain, eh?" He raised his mug in cheers. "In a year or so you'll have more help than you'll need in the shop," Noom said, smiling and gesturing at Philo's 2 sons tumbling around in the hallway. "Too true. Well, I'll leave you to it then." Philo rose and gathered some items for the day. "Dev, when you stop by later for your gear, I'll show you that hammering technique." "Thanks." Dev gave a short salute and Philo was off, leaving Noom with the trio and Cassie still managing the house. She brought Noom a slice of apple pie, some eggs and cheese, and a cup of tea. He smiled his thanks and gobbled down some breakfast as Aiden began speaking. "So it's true that you're the Senex?" Aiden asked. "We've been through so much to find you. Can you help us find the Dark Seer?" Cassie gave a sharp look over, then disappeared to anywhere else with her boys. Aiden took notice of that and continued more softly. "In all our journey, we haven't found out anything about them. But people around here seem to know. Is it a person, a title, a relic? All we know is that you're supposed." Noom held up a finger to cut him off and chewed his pie thoughtfully. "Girl, what do you see?" Omega looked around the room. "Goggles off," he prompted. She tentatively pulled her goggles up over her hair. Her closed eyes were surrounded by lighter circles contrasting with the heavily tanned skin on the rest of her face. She cracked one eye open. "Nothing out of the ordinary. Mostly the same." She pulled her goggles back down. "That's why I wanted to talk here. The vitality of this family keeps Darklight at bay. We can talk openly." "How do you know that about the family?" asked Dev. "Just a hunch. Fewer bad things happen under this roof. Before we unravel all your questions, let me ask, why do you even have them? Most people we see traveling through here are on their way to looting the Hollow. Not bad work if you can handle it. Most cannot. A different type through here preys upon those others, trading in fake charms, omens, and magic, and very real robbery. A rarity are the questers, not those who fancy themselves as such, but the ones seeking to fulfill a dire need. And that type, my friends, are the most trouble." He punctuated the last few words by softly pointing at each of them in turn. "We were told about you, or rather the Senex, by a farseer on the western coast," Aiden answered. "Far south of Witham." Noom raised an eyebrow at the mention of a farseer, and noticed a cloud darken Dev's expression, but held his tongue. "The Burm overtook our town quickly with strange happenings. Injuries, losses, even deaths. As we grappled with the surreality of events, we gradually came to understand the relationship between them and what Oas saw. Aiden gestured at Omega. Not everyone appreciated her visions. None of us understood a dark light at the time, but what she saw so clearly affected events. It was the only lead we had in defending our homes. It was she that led us to the Farseer and her clan in Ferox. I eventually found a trail different from everything else, Omega said. Something like a different color. Manipulation by a seer, Noom guessed. He had heard it described that way before. It turned out, yes, said Aiden. We followed it to Ferox, where we encountered the seers. They taught us much of what was going on, and eventually we... Aiden trailed off, looking at Dev. Dev looked regretful as he took over the narrative. We made mistakes, but we had a purpose and 2 leads. To tame the Hollow, find the Darkseer, and only the Senex of Elocant can find them. And you got this from a Farseer, Noom said dubiously. They stare at unfiltered darklight all day, every day. They say of themselves, the more I see, the more I see, over vast distances and wide-ranging events, ultimately anything and everything affected by the Hollow. But the more they watch, they grow more erratic, unpredictable, and of ill intent as darklight itself. You do not realize they're all insane. They're not, or at least she wasn't, at first. Dev trailed off. Noom felt for the lad. Obviously some close relationship had developed. I'm sure, Noom said gently. She had good intentions. But the Hollow is a devious companion. We can trust what we found out, Aiden said firmly. We know that for sure at much cost. We have a real chance to reverse things. Noom grimaced slightly and sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Okay. You want to know about the Darkseer? A myth rises from grains of truth, so maybe this one exists. Hopefully not. It's said they are human beings that interact with darklight, but unlike any seer, they have no control over it. Darklight is drawn to them like moths to a flame. They are feared as harbingers of doom, disaster, misfortune. There are many of them? Possibly, Noom said. Some think they are the cause of the expansion, dragging the berm with them as they travel. Is that where we find them? Where the berm is expanding? How do we stop them? Noom tamped his hands down to slow them. That may explain the unevenness of the berm, he answered, or it may not. Do they need stopping? There is evil in the Hollow, but dark does not mean evil. Does such a soul have control over what is done to them? Even a Farseer has a choice in their fate, but if everything is true, I suspect a Darkseer does not. A Darkseer. We were told to seek the Darkseer. If there are many, do you know how to find the right one? If there are any, I suspect there are many. Noom leaned his chin on his palm and stared at the corner of the room. Noom? Omega prompted. Reluctantly, Noom said, I know of only one. Maybe, if they're still alive and if this is all true. The trio responded with excitement. How do we get to them? Who are they? What do we do after we find them? Where? You don't. Noom cut through, silencing them. They're deep in the Hollow. We've been through the Hollow, and other people go far in and come back out. You've only cut through the perimeters. I'm talking about Rabidi. That far in, the ways change. Maps are no good. One would need to have been there to find one's way. He regretted this day. He regretted encountering this trio, knowing what they would ask next. Rabidi, that's been lost for decades, and abandoned for longer, observed Dev. But you've been there, Aiden surmised. Aye. You can find your way back? No. But you just said, I said one can. I won't. His heart wrenched at the memory of fleeing Rabbity through the hollow. Aiden said with conviction, we can stem the tide of the hollow. We have a chance of reversing this, of finding and rebuilding all the lost places like Rabbity. Lost places are lost for good. They exist, but what remains is not something with any future outside the hollow. Then the world is doomed? Asked Omega with some anger. I told you, the best thing you can do is go back, far beyond where you came, grow some vegetables, grow some children, and live your best life there. I can't accept that. We can't change anything if we... Omega abruptly stopped. It was impossible to tell her expression. She took off her goggles again. It's here in the room. No more discussion. Go, urged Noom. They all stood. The trio gathered their few items. They must have left most of their gear at the inn. As the three glumly filed through the exit from the house, Aiden turned back in the open doorframe and made a final plea to Noom. Help us find Rabbity. We'll pay you what we can. He knew they were resolved to the bitter end. It's more than I'm willing to do for a fee. My place is here. Farewell. He closed the door behind them. Thank you for listening to this Ember and Sparks production. Click the box on the left to listen to the next chapter or the box on the right to see an overview of all chapters available for this story. Check out the links in the description to listen to this audiobook without interruption. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to never miss a new story. See you soon.